All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started, roll right into this thing. And today I'm continuing on the topic of crucifixion. And I'm going to call this Crucifixion-Your Sign. And actually, we haven't started crucifixion. We're going to start it this week. But last week we talked about his torture and trials and such. And as we study the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, we're going to come across the word cross. And this word cross may not mean exactly what you've been force-fed to think by religious artists and well-meaning Christians. And today we're going to see that there's more than one meaning to the word cross, as well as more than one shape. And one looks like lumber. And during the first century, the Romans typically crucified people on simple cut posts. But they were known to use any materials at hand. They would do it on live trees, on planks, on posts, whatever. These were simple, effective, and easy to come by for the Romans. See, the word cross is always translated one of two Greek words. One is stauros, and the other is zulon. And the word stauros always means a stake or a single post, the word cross. And why the English translators called stauros cross, we don't know, because it's not like that in the Greek at all. But probably too many artists had already drawn things and they had to go with it. And the word zulon means a literal tree or a piece of lumber or a stick. And the ancient Greek writer Homer used the word stauros, many times in his writings, and every single time it meant a stake or a log or a staff. And in the Gospels, the word cross is typically called a stauros, which means a stake or a post. Now, I'm only saying this so that we can get into our mind what it probably looked like. Because what we see in modern Christianity isn't necessarily what happened 2,000 years ago. And it's a really hard image to not think about. And most researchers, all researchers understand this. I don't care what denomination. They all have text on what I'm telling you right now. And so in Acts, it was called this zulon. Luke, who wrote the book of Acts, and who also wrote the book of Luke, he uses this 3 times in the book of Acts, this word zulon, which means a tree, regarding Jesus Christ, what he was crucified on. And Paul once called the implement of Jesus' death a tree, a zulon, in Galatians. Jesus' right-hand man, Peter, called the wooden thing in 1 Peter a zulon, which means a tree. And what's interesting, even the tree of life in the book of Revelation is called a zulon. Just a tree, a piece of wood. And what I'm trying to show you is that men who were eyewitnesses to crucifixions during the first century, and some who were actually at the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, say the shape of the cross was the shape of a tree or a post or a piece of lumber. So every time in the Bible the word cross is used, it's the word stauros, and it means post. Now, did they crucify other things? Yes. But during the first century, it was almost always a post, like a skinny telephone post or a lamp post. And and there's on the website, I'll send you, there's a great record, a great article on this. It's real easy to understand, so it'll be in the text. And the other cross that I'm going to talk about today, it looks like commitment. And one was a simple post, an implement of death, and the other was figurative. And Jesus uses that term, take up your cross and follow me, to describe a certain level of discipleship. He didn't expect everybody to carry around a post with them. Oh, man. We had a guy come through Colorado Springs last year on some journey this time of year, carrying this big old cross, but it had two wheels on the back. I was in a house on Friday, and this guy had a cross as tall as his room in his office. Just a huge thing. And this guy literally stayed with me the whole time I was working, which was 8 hours, and we just talked the word for 8 hours. But he liked his crosses, obviously. And so take up your cross and follow me. Today it might mean bring your A game. It might mean let's give it our all, or let's give it 110%, team. That's sort of what Jesus was saying here, but I'll explain this a lot more later. So now, here they are. They're in this Roman compound, the Roman barracks, a place called the Praetorium, which was right next to the temple. And Jesus had been beaten, mocked. His beard had been ripped off his face, and he'd been spit on. He was slapped around, had his joints dislocated, had a crown of thorns beat into his head, and the soldiers took turns peeling his skin back with metal-tipped whips. He was beat head to toe, front to back, top to bottom. Jesus no longer looked like Jesus. Nobody would put a picture of this in their Bible. And the soldiers that were tasked to carry out this punishment, they pushed Jesus toward this heavy metal-clad set of gates to exit this compound. But first they head toward a stack of well-used, splintered, and blood-stained posts, a bucket of spikes, and they go to the quartermaster for a mallet. And they realize that they may have taken this pre-crucifixion beating just a little too far on this guy. See, the Romans were experts at beating a man just enough so that he could stay alive and be crucified. But they wanted him to die as soon as they could after crucifixion, because they didn't want to sit there. Most soldiers are sort of lazy. And when it comes to something like that. And so remember, the crucifixion was their favorite form and most popular form of capital punishment. And they'd been doing it in Israel for over 100 years. This was nothing new to anybody in Israel. And after beating Jesus to within an inch of his life and pulling his arms out of joint, they know that he'll never be able to carry the 100-pound post, the 300 to 500 yards, to a place called the skull, Golgotha. And the soldiers have no intention of carrying that thing themselves either. And they open the gate, and to the horror of the crowd, the onlookers see what's left of Jesus, and the women begin to scream. 5 soldiers, Jesus, 2 criminals step through the gates and push into the crowd. And they grab the first able-bodied bystander and they force him to carry Jesus' post. Matthew 27, we're going to read 30 through 32. And they spit on him and took the reed and smote him on the head. And of course, his head had that crown of thorns. And after they had mocked him, they took the robe off of him, opening those wounds again, and put his own raiment on him and led him away to crucify him. And as they came out, they found a man of Cyrene, Simon by name, Silphium by game. And him they compelled to bear his cross, or to carry Jesus' stauros, that wooden post. And have you ever seen an old telephone pole that had spikes pounded into it and pulled out of it? You might have seen an old one where somebody had used those spike shoes to climb up. It's just shattered. Well, these posts would have been just gnarly. They were recycled. They had a stack of them. And so this recycled post, they plopped it on Simon's shoulder, and he followed. And so Luke, and I'm just going to skip to a couple of Gospels, so you may just want to listen. Now we're going to talk about Simon of Cyrene. Luke 23:26 says, as they led him away, they laid hold on one Simon. They grabbed Simon. He was right outside those gates. And they throw this post on him. And he has to follow behind Jesus. And they laid hold on one Simon, a Cyrenian, coming out of the country. And on him they laid the cross that he might bear it after Jesus. So was Jesus carrying this thing like the TV shows say? No. First, it wasn't a cross. It was a post. Second, it never says ever that he carried this thing, ever. It never says it. You cannot find it. How many things in Scripture have we just been taught that we accept as truth when it's just an artist's rendition or it's just handed down tradition? And so we have to watch what we think. It may be a pleasant thought or an unpleasant thought, but it still should be real. I mean, if you're saying this guy's your Lord, wouldn't you want to, and you want to do things his way, you want to do the works of Jesus Christ, we want to know what's going on. We want to know what he really did. At least have a good image of it. So here he is. They laid this thing on Simon. They exited the gates. They grabbed him, forced him to carry this tattered post. And Simon did what they said. Why? All he had to do is look at who? Jesus. And he knew these men were deadly serious. Now the word coming out of the country is interesting. The country is the word Argos. It means it's an agricultural area. So somehow this guy looked like a farmer. Maybe he had like bib overalls and a John Deere hat or something on, whatever Simon the sorcerer, a piece of hay or silphium hanging out of his mouth, And and I wondered, why was this included? Well, a little history will help here. The Romans had conquered it, and they owned almost all the land that surrounds the entire Mediterranean Sea, which is about 1,000 miles. All the countries, I mean, Spain, Rome, Greece, Asia Minor, Israel, all the way to Egypt, Cyrene, all the way up through northern Africa, just that whole area. And the Romans infused their culture into every nation they assimilated. And Cyrene was a prosperous Roman city in the lush coastal region of North Africa that we today call Libya. That's where Cyrene was. And they had a cash crop. And the city of Cyrene's chief local export during the first century was a medicinal herb called silphium. And that herb was so important to the economy in Cyrene and so desired by the entire Roman Empire that it was pictured on almost all the coins that were minted in Cyrene. And the Romans said that silphium was worth its weight in silver coin. And the plant was so special, they called it a gift of God. Apollos being their god. And it grew like crazy in Cyrene, and the Romans were crazy for this herb. Sort of like people are crazy for another kind of herb here in Colorado. And this herb was the Roman Empire's plant parenthood. Its sole purpose was to keep women from staying pregnant. Silphium induced abortions. It was the day after herb. And this plant allowed people to live up to the slogan, when in Rome, do as the Romans. Or like we might say, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. You get the picture. It was like when they released this brand new pill called birth control in the 60s. And it allowed women to have sex for pleasure and not just for procreation. Well, same thing happened 2,000 years prior. When the Romans discovered silphium, and the women loved it because now they too could have sex for pleasure. This is where Simon of Cyrene was from. Simon was fresh off his Cyrenian farm and was in town for commerce or to celebrate the Passover in Jerusalem. Now, I don't know if this guy sold this stuff, but for them to say he was a farmer and that he was from Cyrene, there's some connection there. We don't know. We don't know what the guy looked like. Was he a native of the area? Was he a transplant? Was he a Jew? Was he not? We don't know. We really don't know. 2 of his sons are named in another record, though, Alexander and Rufus. Why they're named, there has to be a reason. And so now the crowd, Luke 23:27. And there followed him, Jesus Christ, a great company of people and of women, which also bewailed and lamented him. I think about what a sight. A great company. That means a huge crowd of people. Simon's lugging this 75 to 100 pound log behind a savagely beaten man. And people began screaming and crying when they see him, when they see Jesus. The word bewailed means to hit or to thump yourself. It means to pound your chest. Lament means to wail or scream out loud. So these women, when they're screaming, and then they just start hitting themselves, not like Tarzan, they just didn't know what to do. You ever seen somebody just hitting their head? They don't know what to do with their emotions. That's how these women were. These people were in either great emotional pain or they just were totally shocked at the sight of Jesus. They screamed and beat their chests in grief. They hurt just looking at him. Some of them knew him. Matthew 27:55-56, don't turn there, but a gist of it says that some of these women had followed Jesus from Galilee, and they ministered unto him, among which was Mary Magdalene, you've heard of her, Mary the mother of James and Joseph or John, those were Peter's business partners, and the mother of Zebedee's children. See, these women traveled with Jesus from Galilee the prior week. And remember all the records we've shared over the last month or so? You know, they'd been with him, walking with him next to the Jordan River, those 90 miles from Galilee to Jordan. Then they crossed the Jordan and went through Jericho. And then it's about 20 miles to Jerusalem. So it's about 90 miles these people had been with them. They were part of the crowd when Jesus had healed 4 blind men, 2 people on each side, 1 on the beginning, the east side of Jericho, 3 on the other side. You know, they had seen people reject Jesus when he went to dinner with the most notorious little big man, Zacchaeus. And they all knew that he would be tortured and killed in the next few days. And some even believed him when he said he was going to rise from the dead. They'd been in the crowd when twice they threw palm leaves and tree branches and clothing in the way of the donkey he was riding into Jerusalem. They saw him run the merchants out of the temple on the money falling and doves flying. They heard children cry in utter support of Jesus, causing the religious leaders to lose their minds. They saw lame men just drag themselves up to Jesus in that temple courtyard and get healed. They saw blind men just reaching, trying to find Jesus, and he healed them too. This was all just days before the record we're reading now. They'd all heard about his arrest. They'd all heard about his torture, but this was the first time they saw him. Can you imagine? You ever seen somebody just beat so badly it's hard to even look at them? You know, what was going through their heads? All they wanted to do was help, but all they saw was hurt. His mom saw him too. And you mothers know how difficult that must be. You know, they had just left the Roman compound. Jesus didn't look too good. Luke 23, probably one of the most beautiful people ever on earth. Now one of the most unlookable. Almost somebody you just couldn't even look at. So Luke 23:28, but Jesus turning unto them said, Daughters of Jerusalem, weep not for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, the days are coming in the which they shall say, Blessed are the barren. In other words, blessed to not have kids, and wombs that never bear, and paps, or breasts which never gave suck. Then shall they begin to say to the mountains. Now remember, Jesus is all beat up. He turns, all these women are walking right next to him, the ones he knows, and he turns to them and he says this. He goes, don't weep for me, weep for yourselves, because days are coming when you'll wish you never had children. Then shall they begin to say, you're going to say to a mountain, fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. I wish I was in an avalanche. I wish I was in a rock slide, a mudslide. What? Dead. For if they do these things in a green tree, what shall be done in the dry? And I'll explain that. See, Jesus was barely able to walk. And he's in front of this farmer from North Africa named Simon. A huge crowd of men and women are crying, wailing, pounding their chests, hating themselves. They didn't know what to do with their emotions. This whole crowd of ladies didn't know what to do. They all heard for Jesus. He turns his head, he looks at them, and talks to these amazing ladies who had been with him through so much. And these women are walking as close to him as the Roman guards would allow. And he says, don't cry for me, you better cry for yourselves. Because there's a day coming when things are going to be a whole lot worse. And he finished this comment saying, if they treat me, a flourishing tree that stayed green because it's fed by spiritual living water from God, people wither because the revelation dries up. Pretty heavy thing to say, but that's a gist of what he just meant by that. Verse 32, and there were also two other malefactors, bad guys, led with him to be put to death. And they were come to the place, I was only like 400 or 500 yards away. It's like a long city block, like walking through the mall. That's about how far it was. And when they were come to the place which is called Calvary, Golgotha, and the skull all are the exact same place. They have different names. Just like Colorado Springs. Could be called the Springs. Now they're trying to call it the City of Champions. There's names for every city. And so here they are. They were crucified, and there they crucified him and the malefactors, one on the right hand and the other on the left. So this is about a quarter mile. They're walking, like I said, it's just like a couple of city blocks, but like a tidal wave of tears, moved by curiosity, the mob surged toward Golgotha, about a quarter mile. And once there, Simon is serene. He drops that post, and he's probably shoved back into the crowd by the Roman guards, no longer needed. And the religious leaders try to maintain a front row view. This is what they've been waiting for so long. They tried to kill him early in his ministry. And then all of a sudden, you hear the sharp clink of a mallet on metal. And they pound these guys through their wrist and ankles into those posts. And then they take those posts and they shove it up, and boom, then it falls into that hole, further accentuating that pain. Imagine what your wrist would feel like. And when it says his hands was probably right here. That's where the Romans did it when they crucified, because it would pull right through a hand. So wrist is still part of the hand, and the ankle is still part of the foot. Okay, so they pound these about 4-inch nails into through the ankles and through the wrist. I mean, it's nasty. It's hard to breathe. All these guys had been beat. Jesus was beat a little bit more. And the posts with bodies attached, they leaned him upright and thunk, dropped him into the hole, and then stuck little rocks around there to hold him. These are holes that are always there. They use them over and over again, just like the posts. And here's what Jesus said. After he's nailed up, here's what he says. Verse 34, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Now, most of us would have something else to say. Many 4-letter words might pop out of one's mouth at this point. If you get mad when people just cut you off on I-25, what would you do if they nail you to a post? And he says, forgive them, for they know not what they do. This is going to mean a lot more next week. And they parted his raiment and cast lots. See, what they do is before they pin him up, they strip the guys naked. And then they have a pile of clothes at the foot. So these guys are up there all naked. Jesus was naked. His mom's there. His aunt's there. Mary Magdalene's there. The religious leaders are there. And they parted his raiment and cast lots. And the people stood beholding. Now remember, it's not on crosses, it's on these posts. And the trees didn't grow super tall there, so they were probably almost eye level with anybody nearby them. Now they're up on a little rise, the place called the Skull. And the skull just means it didn't look like a skull with eyes and all that. It's just looks like shaped like the top of a human head. It's just a little bump in the plain is all it was. Don't know how high it is. It's probably a church built on by something. Who knows? And the people stood beholding, and the rulers also with them derided him. Now he's hanging there, he's beat to a pulp, and now they're just harassing him, saying, he saved others, let him save himself, if he be the Christ, the chosen of God. And the soldiers also mocked him, coming to him and offering him vinegar, and saying, if thou be the King of the Jews, save thyself. So he's stripped naked, his clothes are taken. These Roman guys, they stripped him, they took his clothes. This was normal. John 19 tells a little bit more. Then the soldiers, when they had crucified Jesus, took his garments and made 4 parts, to each soldier a part. So how many soldiers were there? 4. Now there was one more, but he didn't take part in any of this. He just had to make sure they did it. You might have seen guys on military bases when I was on Air Force bases, and there's always one guy watching other people work. Usually it was one guy working, 4 guys watching, but here there's one guy watching, 4 guys working. And so they made 4 parts to every soldier his coat, which means 5 pieces. Now the coat was without seam, woven from the top throughout. Pretty special thing. Verse 24. And they said therefore among themselves, let's not rend it, let's not cut this thing or rip this, but cast lots for it. Whose it shall be, that the scripture might be fulfilled, which saith, they didn't say this, they didn't want to fulfill scripture, but they parted my garments among them, and for my vesture they did cast things as soldiers did. 1,000 years before, prophesied that people were going to gamble, or they were going to cast lots for his clothing. It's pretty crazy. And next week I'll talk a little bit more about this, but the psalmist and Isaiah who saw this stuff, when it talks about his visage was so marred more than any man and his form more than sons of men, and Isaiah saw him. God showed Isaiah what Jesus Christ was going to look like. We'll read it. We're going to read something next week. It's going to show where his hands and feet were pierced. God showed David Jesus Christ hanging on that post. Isn't that nuts? But God already knows. He's already there. He can show you whatever you need to know to keep you going. See, why would you want to split up a dead man's clothing? I mean, I wouldn't want it, personally, especially bloody clothing. I wouldn't want it. But they didn't try to sew him something. Probably didn't have girlfriends. These guys were the lowest level of Roman soldiers. They were probably conscripted. They were taken from another country. It's either you be a slave or you join the legion. So these were the lowest level of military. And all they got paid was room and board. Period. They just lived. That was their pay. There was no retirement. There was no TRICARE. All it was is you had a place to sleep and food to eat. That's it. And so it was a hard life for these guys, and so they felt very little remorse for anybody they were crucifying. So they bartered over these 5 pieces of clothing, and these would have been the outer garment, then something called a tunic, which is an undergarment, and then a loincloth, and then a headcloth, and then sandals. Those are the 5 pieces of clothing. And see, the more people that got crucified, the more clothing they each got. So it's sort of a sweet deal if you're poor. You've heard of grave robbers, go in and do things like that. We think nobody would ever do this stuff, but they do. They still do it. And so they were going to hit some bounty that day. Now the centurion, their leader, just watched to make sure everything was done right and that the crowd didn't get out of hand. And you'll see that in all the records, he never really got involved in any of the conversation or any of the bartering. And now the soldiers, they basically just sit down on the ground and they're waiting for these guys to die. It's Wednesday. Just do a little Bible study. This is Wednesday, not Friday. You can't, because Jesus said he would be in the grave for 72 hours, 3 days and 3 nights. We'll hit this in 2 weeks. So it's 72 hours. You can't get that from Friday to Sunday. But if you understand the Sabbath, almost every researcher knows this. This is nothing new. So Jesus is surrounded by love even while he feels such torment. And did you know that the guards allowed a few people to stand right next to a crucified person while he was hanging there? And John 19:25 says, and now there stood by the cross the stake or the post. Remember, every time it says cross, it's storos, post. When they stood by the cross of the post of Jesus, his mother and his mother's sister, his aunt, Mary the wife of Cleopas, and Mary Magdalene. So he's surrounded by all these Marys, all these ladies that he knew very well. And when Jesus saw his mother and the disciples standing by, so there's another disciple, probably male, whom he loved, he said unto his mother, Behold, thy son. You've seen the TV shows. And then said he to the disciple, Behold, thy mother. And from that hour the disciple took her unto his own home. And it doesn't mean right then he drug Mary off and they went home. But at that point, he became her son, and she became his stepmom, so to speak, his surrogate mother. And Jesus is beat like few men have ever been beat. And while hanging there in agony, he makes sure his mom is taken care of. And she and a few others are right at his side. And remember, Jesus is probably naked. And his head may have been just a little higher than eye level to them. If they're standing next to him and he's on an 8-foot post sunk 2 feet in the ground, he's eye level with them. His mom's leaning right on him. He's not way up there in the air. That wasn't efficient. Too much of a hassle for the Romans. They just kill fast and kill well. They were well trained, these guys. And so Jesus asked this unnamed disciple to care for his mom after he's gone. Her husband Joseph was not in the picture at this time. We don't know. Did he die? We don't know. Did he just leave because of the pressure? We don't know. The Bible doesn't say. It doesn't mention him after Jesus was 15 years old. So we just don't know. Mary may have been a single mom since he was 15. So I think she still did a pretty good job. Yeah, a lot of single moms do a great job. I wonder where Jesus' half-brothers were. Where were they? Why would Jesus just assume that they wouldn't take care of their mom? Just think about it. He's saying, that's your new son. Boy, that's going to be your mom. Take care of her. He has brothers, half-brothers. Where are they? Why would he just assume that they were not going to do this? It's crazy. Now, 2 of his brothers later got born again and wrote epistles. A guy named James and Judas, not the bad Judas, but he had a brother named Jude. The Epistle of Jude you might have read. That's Jesus' half-brother. But at this point, they weren't in the picture either. Pretty crazy. Maybe they're off living with Joseph, somewhere else. Who knows? We just don't know. Where were his sisters? He had sisters too. Why wouldn't they take care of mom? Pretty wild. Can you imagine Mary gently leaning against her injured son as he makes sure that she's taken care of? This is the woman who had been entrusted by God to raise her boy to be the Christ. No pressure. No pressure. Mary had done an excellent job raising her son to be the Messiah. Mary knew all too well the punishment that Jesus would someday have to go through because she studied the Word with him. She sang the songs with him. Now she had to experience it with him. Changes. See, the crowd's beginning to get restless now, and the guards are just sitting there watching. Someone jumps up. Someone else jumps up, and he tears down the sign that Pilate had put up there. He slapped it down, knocked it down, something. maybe reached in front of Jesus and ripped it off because they didn't like it saying the King of the Jews. So one of them had to trek back the quarter mile back to the compound and get another sign made and come up, lean in front of Jesus and pound this next sign up right in front of him. Now 2 more men that were worse than the first 2. They were ushered up to Golgotha by another set of guards. And they too were pinned to their post and set upright in their pre-dug holes. Rocks shoved in to hold them in place. Now there's 5 people up there. Just read it. It's not that hard of a study. It's a very simple Bible study if you just look at all 4 Gospels. 4 fingers, just flip back and forth, and you'll see there was 5 people crucified that day. This was a place of execution, but it was also on a main road leading into town. Why? So people would learn. They'd learn that the Romans mean business. Don't mess with us. Right on a main thoroughfare. We're too classy nowadays for something like that. Remember I told you a few year or so ago when we talked about Jonah going to Nineveh? Nineveh is in Mosul, Iraq. And that's where he walked from the when he got barfed out by that big old sea creature. He walked 400 miles to Mosul, and Nineveh was the most ruthless city in the world. They skinned their enemies and then plastered the outside walls of their city with people's skins. Nasty stuff. Romans were a little bit nicer. They just hung them up. And so Matthew 27:38, and there were 2 thieves. These are armed robbers. These are really bad guys. Crucified with them, one on the right hand, another on the left. So 2 plus 2 is 4. And they that passed by reviled him, wagging their heads. It didn't say they reviled all of them. They reviled him. Him meaning who? So these people, they either loved him or they hated him. People pass by this main road right next to all these posts, these stakes. And these 5 guys they're spiked up there. They're pinned up to these posts by their wrists and their ankles. And these people walked by and shook their heads, and they said horrible things directly to the face of Jesus Christ. They might have been at eye level. Matthew 4, let's go verse 40 now. And saying, here's what they said. Thou that destroyed the temple and buildest it in 3 days, save thyself, if thou be the Son of God. Come down off that cross. They talk this directly to Jesus. Now likewise also the chief priests mocking him with the scribes and elders. So these are the holy religious people who are going to do the Passover for all the holy religious people of Israel. And they say, he saved others. Himself he cannot save. If he be the King of Israel, let him now come down from the cross, and we will believe in him. He trusted in God. Let him deliver him now. If he will have him, if God wants him, for he said, I am the Son of God. And the thieves also, which were crucified with him, cast the same into his teeth. Those recently crucified bad guys spoke the same thing to Jesus. So everybody's saying, get yourself down. What's wrong with you? You're the Son of God. You should be able to get down. Where's your God now? And they just do this. But what's wild is the chief priests, they don't even talk to Jesus. He means nothing to them. Because when it talks about he and he uses all these pronouns, they're talking to each other. They're going, look at him now. He can't even get himself down. How he believed in God. How come God doesn't get him down? He called himself, can you believe he called himself the Son of God? Oh my gosh. And they're saying this. Everyone piles on here. Both the recently crucified robbers and the religious people and the people walking by. And those low-level soldiers are joining in and putting down the perfect Son of God. But it doesn't say the centurion said anything. And the people talk to Jesus. The wounded men, the other tortured men, they talked to Jesus, but the scribes and elders, they were too good to talk to him because it was all about image. Weak people talk about people. Now the crowd gets stirred up, by all this, and they tear the sign down again a second time. And the Romans nail a third sign above Jesus' head. And one of the guys who had left the praetorium with Jesus, who was crucified at the same time, told one of the other bad guys to shut up. I mean, he's hanging there, and he tells one of the guys, shut up! And he said, we deserve to be crucified, but this guy's done nothing wrong. And then he looks at Jesus. He's right next to me. He goes, hey, remember me when you're in your kingdom. And Jesus says, will do. You're going to be there with me. Pretty crazy stuff. And we're going to pick up the rest of this record next week. But now I want to talk about this figurative cross, which I mentioned earlier. And I need to explain this briefly. And have you ever heard the term used by Jesus, take up your cross and follow me? We've all heard that. And it's used a handful of times in his earthly ministry. I've found 4 times, basically. And he literally didn't mean for them to carry a cross or a post around with them everywhere they went. There wasn't 400 people carrying these posts, dragging them 90 miles from Galilee to Jerusalem. It'd be ridiculous. This means something different. It's the same word, storos, though. Exact same word. And Jesus and all the disciples had been raised in a country where seeing someone crucified was commonplace. They'd all seen it, hundreds, maybe thousands of times in their life. This was nothing new. And on most of those posts, there was a sign that would have the person's name and what they did, who they became, what they made of their life. What became of their life? The term bear your cross was never ever used in the Old Testament. But it means one of 2 things. Either it could have been a Roman expression that infiltrated Judean nomenclature because of the many thousands of crucifixions they did. Or it may have been an idiom the Judeans coined from watching condemned people trudging through the streets of northwestern Jerusalem carrying their post with their sign nailed to it. See, probably every criminal had their sentence or what had become of their lives pinned to that post. And here's the 4 times, real quick. But one, right after he chose his apostles, he used this phrase, take up your cross and follow me, to teach the needed heart of discipleship. The second time was right after Peter reproved Jesus for telling them he was going to be killed and rise again in 3 days. And Jesus said, get behind me, Satan. And then he says, then he looks to all his disciples and he said, you guys deny yourself and you need to take up your cross and follow me. And then the third time was when he was dealing with that young rich man who said, I'll follow you anywhere. And Jesus said, go sell all your stuff, give your money to the poor, and take up your cross and follow me. And then the fourth time was near the end of the ministry, and he reuses that same phrase to, again, teach his disciples discipleship with that. So what it really means is get committed. You need to give your all if you're going to follow me. You can't follow me halfway. And that one short sentence on their sign summarized and defined who they had decided to be. It's what they made their life. It told everyone who they were. And like on a lot of these guys, it's, I'm a murderer. I'm a riotous slave. I'm a traitor. I'm a robber. I'm a pirate. I've been a lifelong criminal. I started an insurrection. So that's what these people had become. Jesus' sign, penned by the recently washed hands of Pilate, the Roman leader, was as telling as it was accurate. It said, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Judeans. Pilate nailed it. To the Romans, that term smacked traitorous. That's why they killed him. To the Judean leaders, it seemed like blasphemy, worthy of death. But to the believers, it was true. Each of us has one sentence that could and should describe our lives. That sentence that somebody else would say about you, or you might say about yourself, is your cross. Who are you? See, your post, your stake should be your purpose on earth. It should describe your calling. If someone could sum up your whole life into one sentence, or if you were to sum up your whole life into one single sentence, what would it say? Who are you? What have you done with your life? Those are the two usages of the word cross in the New Testament. One was made of wood, and the other is made of commitment. What does your sign say? God bless.